So now is the moment for some words from me on this, the first night of Rosh Hashanah. And so now's the time to get comfortable, put your feet up, put your pajamas on, get yourself a drink. A sweet new year to everyone. I just want to say a word about CBST's staff and offer my personal deep thanks to everyone on CBST's staff. This has been the most difficult Yamim Noraim, Days of Awe, high holiday season I have ever experienced in 30 years of being senior rabbi at CBST. And CBST's staff has been put under a vise of pressure to try and work through the many, many, many difficult issues to pull us together for tonight, for all of Yontiv, and for the rest of these 10 days. So be kind when you send a text asking what happened to that link. Think carefully of the tone you use when you call a CBST member to, how shall we say, point out something that hasn't gone right. As Alan Liu said in his famous book about spirituality, act as if the tape is always running. In these days of awe especially, but all year long, think about how you handle and treat somebody who's at the other end of that email or phone call pointing out all the ways that CBST has not lived up to our aspirations, have not missed the mark. And by the way, this gives me the opportunity to let all of you know that we have a very special tradition at CBST, that we have so many new members, maybe you don't know, that if you find a mistake in any one of our printed documents or you see something we've done terribly wrong, we are delighted to be told about it, especially Yolanda Podosinsky, our executive director, and Sabrina Farber, our president. But as of the new year, for these 10 days, if there are any such moments that happen, we're delighted that that comes along with a donation of $1,000 to the synagogue. So thank you all for pointing out all the things we do wrong, and we really look forward to those donations. We really appreciate it. Thanks so very, very, very much. So here we are at the Drashah for the first evening of Rosh Hashanah in a year. Can you even think about what's happened in this past year? Remember, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on the first evening of Rosh Hashanah last year. What has happened from last year to this year just about the law in this country? We lived through an election cycle last year. We lived through an attack on the Capitol of the United States, unheard of, and then denied or defended by large chunks of this country. We lived through the pandemic spreading like wildfire, climate events like the heat dome and fires and droughts around the world and flash floods twice in a week in New York City, killing dozens of people. We've experienced the vast climate crises. We lived through the deaths of so many people. And we also got a vaccine this year. We lived through so many different changes in the world. There was a great conflict in Israel and Gaza that we lived through. Tremendous racism that we experienced on the streets of this city with the trials also of some of those who were responsible and the outrage in response to some of them. We lived through a season of marches demanding justice. So many things have happened from this last Rosh Hashanah to this year. What about your own lives? If you had to chart, really create a chart from last year to this year, what would the lows have been for you and what would the highs have looked like? How long were the lows and how long were the highs? Who were the people who helped you when you were in one of those pits in the lows? And where and how were you able to celebrate some of the highs? For those of you who are parents or guardians or in relationship with young children during this period of the pandemic, there are no words to describe how difficult this time has been for kids. No words to describe what it's been like for families trying to negotiate for all these 18 months or so, having children online or partially in school or partially at home. and how hard it is to become a math teacher when, let's just face it, you're terrible at arithmetic. So these have been difficult times for so many. If you've lived and are living alone, the isolation that has been felt and the sense of lack of human contact, there is no good way to go through the pandemic. One thing is true, that community is a pretty powerful antidote and a pretty powerful arc on which we ride to try and move through these terrible times. What is the point of a drash or a sermon or a Devar Torah? Some drashot teach something new based on text, maybe based on the midrash or halacha or agadah or something very, very textually based. And the point of them is to learn, to expand our minds, to understand more deeply our sacred texts. Some drashot bring comfort. Some are there to inspire or to demand and hold us accountable. Some are focused on social justice. Some are focused on personal spiritual growth. Some are political. Some are spiritual. All include God. I, for one, don't make a distinction between political and spiritual, although I do understand when people say to me, you know what, I want a drash that's strictly spiritual, or I really respond to your drashot which are political. For me, they are one and the same. They're a different lens, a different color to look at the same thing. Who are we in the world and what brings us purpose and meaning? And from what do we derive comfort and strength? There is a famous saying that I think was originally written about newspapers, but many people talk about sermons this way, that they should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Well, I don't think anybody's particularly comfortable right now. And as I've been giving the drashot of the 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, I've been really focused on comfort. I do not believe in these false binaries and distinctions that make things in little boxes. And sometimes each of us needs different things. I've been studying for these last 18 months the book of Tehillim, of Psalms, with a wonderful community of CBST. Some are members and some are not. They come from all over the world, quite literally, and I'm sure many of you are joining us at services tonight. And we have explored the power of Tehillim, which are a very deep part of my spiritual life since my teens. Because in the Psalms are found expressions that are thousands of years old to get both at the spiritual lows, the spiritual highs, that can respond and reflect the political realities. And that is a part of creating a religious language that has depth and meaning and purpose. So, Hayom Harat Olam. We throw that phrase around a lot when we talk about Rosh Hashanah because while Rosh Hashanah has deep spiritual meaning, of course, it is also linked to the very creation of the world itself. The historical event, if we can call it that is connected to Rosh Hashanah, is the creation of the world. Now we Jews, not just me as a Reform or a Reconstructionist Jew or a liberal progressive Jew, believe in science. That's true of the most Orthodox Jew in the universe. Judaism believes that science is a creation of God. And if there's knowledge that God has put on the earth for us to learn in order to save a life or improve the quality of life, then that's godly. There is no sense that there's a struggle between science and religion in Judaism. But okay, what do we mean 5782 exactly? It's true, some people might think of that as literal terms, but even some of Chazal, some of our traditional rabbis see it as a metaphor. But the world was created. That's not in debates in the sense of we don't know how and we don't know what formed the world, but the text of the Bible, which we celebrate on Rosh Hashanah, is about celebrating that process of creation. And how powerful a thing to celebrate historically when we're talking about the renewal of the year, the rebirth of a year, the opportunity to reset our lives and start again. The Jewish text that we go back to and the image we have in our mind is creation itself, Briat ha'olam, the creation of the world. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. Now, there are many ways to explore those words and not be scientifically put into anxiety. I'm going to speak in the metaphorical, in the midrashic, in the mythic, because that language, I believe, has such deep truths. God created the world according to that first chapter of Genesis, of Bereshit, from chaos. And as I've said in Drashah here at CBST for years, it is teaching us that creativity itself is born from chaos. And those of us who are full of fear and anxiety because chaos exists in our lives or in our world are given this unbelievable model that there was tohu vavohu, that there was chaos and formlessness. And from that came the very world itself. So that's a piece of comfort that this drash is bringing you, I hope. That just because we're in a moment of great chaos in the world in which we live, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that chaos, doesn't mean that the chaos will not generate great creativity and great beauty and response as beautiful as the world itself. We are taught that we are supposed to imitate the Holy One. We are supposed to be creators and to be creative. But the beginning of the beginning didn't last very long, and so we come back to this sense of the total uncertainty of the time we're in. Okay, the world was formed, and then what? Over and over again, we see through stories throughout the Tanakh and through Chazal, the rabbis of our tradition, that it's not enough for the world to have been created once. We have the job or the obligation to keep on recreating ourselves and the world itself. So, the first example. Life, at first, according to the Midrashim and into the text itself of the Chumash, was perfect, right? We even use as a word for perfection the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. We use even in English to talk about the perfect time. And Joni Mitchell in her song Woodstock even talks about getting back to the garden. What is she talking about? She's talking about the Garden of Eden. We have, as a sense, there was a time of perfection after the creation of the world itself. But that didn't last very long at all, remember? What happened? There were two trees. I'll quickly review it. I could study this as a class for a year, just this section. It's so rich. There were two trees. Some of our traditions say it was actually one tree with two major branches, the tree of life and the tree of knowing good from evil. Eitz hada'at tov v'ra, the tree of knowledge, we call that sometimes, but it's not just knowledge, it's the knowledge of knowing good from evil. We are told in the story, and I'm not going to go through these details of the snake and Adam and Eve, that's a whole other drash. We could eat from the tree of life, we are told, but not the other. And of course, we did eat from the tree of Eitz hada'at tov v'ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the Mefarshim, Chazal, talk a lot about what changed at the moment that we ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Some say before we ate from that, evil was entirely external to us as human beings. External evil is sometimes a lot easier to deal with than internal evil, right? And after we ate from that tree, we discovered that we could be as evil as somebody else. Others say that this was the introduction of understanding evil in the world, that before that, Adam and Eve didn't really understand there was evil. They hadn't experienced a death. They hadn't known about violence or evil or hatred yet. It comes soon, don't worry. But they hadn't known it yet. That this is the beginning of knowing about evil in the world in general. Evil on the inside and evil on the outside. For Christianity, by the way, this is a very significant moment because it is the moment of the fall of man, and humanity inherits this sin and guilt from Adam and Eve forever. By the way, the food of the Eitz V'Da'at, the tree of knowledge, is sometimes portrayed as an apple, which is an interesting feature of Rosh Hashanah. But we kind of doubt it from the biblical Hebrew. But it's a nice idea that we take this apple now and dip it into honey. But that's another story. So many in Chazal say that part of what we learned when we learned about the existence of evil is that we also learned that we are mortal and that all of us will one day die. And this is one of the themes, of course, of these 10 days. More a focus of Yom Kippur, but part of all these 10 days of awe, which is that we are mortal. And this is what we learned at that moment that we ate from this tree of good and evil. But Chazal say this gives us an opportunity to actually do something with the time that we have on this earth. Before we ate, we had clarity. It was easy. But how do we live in the world once we know something so deep that evil exists, or something so deep that life is finite, that those we love most in the world will one day die? They will leave us, or we will die first. What happens when our worlds are shaken to that kind of core? On 9/11, which we observe soon, the 20th anniversary, I think it's 9/11, right? So many people said they would never feel secure again. I always found that confusing to me. As a Jew, who feels secure? I couldn't understand that this was a new moment, but it was like for many people in America, it was the eating from the tree of knowledge that guess what? Life is insecure, there's full of uncertainties, and you might die from an airplane with evil intent crashing into your office one day. I don't know, as a Jew, that didn't strike me as a new idea. I was standing on Washington Street on the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, having just parked my car on Perry Street and about to walk to our Bethune Street office when I heard the first plane hit the World Trade Center. I turned around and I saw it explode into a ball of fire. I stood there with a bunch of people on Washington Street, and there's a clear shot, if you stand on Washington and Perry, down to where the World Trade Towers used to stand. I mean, an absolute clear shot. It was a beautiful day. The sky there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And all these people I was standing with saying, wow, a terrible accident. This plane just crashed in the World Trade Center. Somebody must have gotten lost. And I turned to them and I said, that's terrorism. And I realized, oh my God, I'm Jewish. And I kind of said to myself, don't assume everything that happens in the world is terrorism. And of course, because I had already eaten from that tree of knowledge about life being uncertain and insecure as a fundamental truth, we Jews know that life can change on a dime, that anti-Semitism can turn a people from being integrated and comfortable and in leadership positions in a country into being led to slaughter soon after. We know that. So that day, look at what that day, 9/11/2001, unleashed in America. It could have been a moment of tohu vavohu in which God modeled creating beauty and a world full of nature and art. We could have come out of that moment of crisis, that moment of tohu vavohu, and created something beautiful. Instead, we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, the war which just ended 20 years later. For a few days after 9/11, the good angels were released all over New York City, for sure, where I was. I don't know what it was like in other places. It was fantastic. People were feeding each other. Restaurants had tables set up outside. So many people were streaming to the site to help that they couldn't even handle the numbers of first responders who were digging and helping. It was so deeply moving. We celebrated Rosh Hashanah that year a few days after 9/11, and we could smell in the air the burning bodies and the burning metal from the tower. We in the Javits Center, then we had 6,000 people gathered together, and we prayed that night. And that prayer is now in our Friday night Siddur. And we said, may we, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, come together to know that our souls are stronger than the steel of those towers. And may we fight to build a world in which we are all safe. How many deaths, how much destruction has taken place? How many civil rights eroded in this country? How do we go on? Last year, on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. I had to announce it from here, and many of you heard it for the first time live here. She wrote at that time, and I quoted it then in my second day Drashah, something that I urge us to remember. She said, dissents speak to a future. It's not simple. It's not simply to say my colleagues are wrong and I would do it this way. But the greatest dissents do become court opinions, and gradually over time, their views become the dominant view. This woman had such a view of history, such a sense that no matter what, even when the tides are tremendously against us, we keep on saying what we know to be right and true and build that foundation for a future which is ready to act in that way. Last week's Supreme Court ruling, so horrific as it was, passed as a shadow act late at night, elicited this dissent from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. This act is clearly unconstitutional under existing precedents. The respondents do not even try to argue otherwise, nor could they. No federal appellate court has ever upheld such a comprehensive prohibition on abortion before viability under current law. The Texas legislature was aware of this binding precedent, and to circumvent it, they took the extraordinary step of enlisting private citizens to do what the state could not. The act authorizes any private citizen to file a lawsuit against any person who provides an abortion in a violation of the act, aids or abets such an abortion, including paying for it, regardless of whether they knew the abortion is prohibited under the act or even intends to engage in such conduct. Courts are required to enjoin the defendant from engaging in these actions to the future and to award the private citizen plaintiff $10,000 in statutory damages for each forbidden abortion performed or aided by the defendant. In effect, Justice Sotomayor says in her dissent, the Texas legislature has deputized the state citizens as bounty hunters, offering them cash prizes for civilly prosecuting their neighbors' medical procedures. Taken together, the act is a breathtaking act of defiance of the Constitution, of this court's precedents, and of the rights of women seeking abortions throughout Texas. Today, the court finally tells the nation that it has declined to act because the state of Texas gambit has won. The court, these are ellipses between these paragraphs. You could read the whole dissent. The court should not be so content to ignore its constitutional obligations to protect not only the rights of women, but also the sanctity of its precedents and of the rule of law. I dissent. We are in very difficult times. Politically, spiritually, we are in times of great uncertainty. The Mekubalim, the mystics in Jewish tradition, see the chet of the Eitz Hadat, see the thing that was done wrong in that tree of knowledge by eating the fruit of it, was doing something, I think, kind of extraordinary. And I'm offering you this teaching today as a way of thinking about how we respond to the onslaught of so many things of great fear and disappointment. I have said in multiple times, in multiple ways, that repairing the world is comprised of two parts. One is fighting the ugliness and injustice, and the other is creating beauty in this world. The Mekubalim said that after the Chet Eitz Hadat, all the good and the evil in the world got completely mixed up. Before, inside of Gan Eden, it was very separated. You could see what was good and you could see what was bad, and inside people were good, but afterwards, everything was mixed up. There's a concept in the Mekubalim called the Be'irurim, which means to separate out or to separate out. And this concept in Kabbalistic literature means to fix the chet of Eitz HaDa'at by doing what? If holiness and evil are so mixed up in the world that in some ways we cannot avoid the evil because the evil affects us in all different ways, the Mekubalim said this, that the only way to respond is to increase the holiness. Imagine, if you will, there's a kind of a finite space for good and evil. And if we, every day in every one of our actions, does that which expands the holiness, according to the Mekubalim, it kind of deprives the oxygen to the evil. I love this image. It matters not what the good is, so to speak. It matters that you're just increasing the amount of holiness in the world. And as the bubble or balloon of the holiness expands, it decreases the space for evil. It doesn't mean that it happens overnight or it even happens in our lifetimes. But it means for the Mekubalim, increasing that holiness, becoming a more educated Jew, a more engaged Jew, a human being who's more engaged in repairing the broken world in which we exist, creating great music and art and things of great beauty. Every single one of those acts, from holding the door open for somebody, to going to a demonstration, to playing the piano or singing or creating art, or going to a museum and appreciating art, or loving a purple flower, or riding a bicycle through Central Park and loving the art. Every single thing of goodness that we do in the world responds to the chet of the Eitz Hadat, of the tree of knowledge, by expanding the goodness. It's on each of us to do that, in whichever way we are organized, in whichever ways we are human. No one is exempt. Sing, be, live, see this dark and stormy hour. The wind it stirs, the scorched earth cries out in vain. O war and power, you blind and blur the torn heart. But music and singing have been my refuge. And music and singing shall be my light, a light of song shining strong. Alleluia, through the darkness, pain, and strife. I'll sing, be, live, see peace. The psalmist says and tells us, joy comes in the morning. I might weep all night long, but joy will come in the morning. Please, God, be with us. Help us to turn our mourning into dancing so that we can express gratitude, odeka, so we can express gratitude to you. A sweet and a healthy and a happy new year to everyone.